In the ruins of occupied France, 12-year-old Evelyn has learned that survival means invisibility. Orphaned, starving, and alone, she has mastered the art of becoming a ghost among the rubble. But when she hears mysterious thumping beneath the frozen ground and discovers an American soldier buried alive, her world shatters in an instant. The soldier shouldn't be alive. He shouldn't know her name. And he carries documents so dangerous that both Allied and German forces will kill to possess them. Now, with ruthless enemies closing in from all sides, Evelyn must make an impossible choice. Abandon the wounded soldier to save herself, or risk everything to protect secrets that could change the course of the war and expose atrocities that powerful men have killed to conceal. What terrifies her most isn't the German patrols hunting them through bombed-out streets. It's the soldier's haunting words as he presses blood-stained papers into her small hands. Your father wanted you to have these. He knew someday they'd find you too. The air tasted of ash and despair. Evelyn's stomach contracted with such violence that she doubled over, her 12-year-old frame folding like damaged paper against the crumbling wall of what had once been a bakery. 3 days without food. The hunger wasn't just in her belly anymore. It lived in her temples, behind her eyes, between her shoulder blades. It had become a creature that inhabited her entire body. She pressed her forehead against the cold stone, feeling dizzy as the world tilted sideways. Through the broken window frame, she could see German soldiers dragging a screaming woman down the street. The woman's fingers clawed desperately at the cobblestones, leaving trails of blood. No one looked. No one helped. Evelyn bit her lip until she tasted copper, forcing herself to remain silent, invisible. Death was everywhere in this forgotten corner of France. It hung from the blackened rafters of bombed buildings and floated in puddles of rainwater mixed with things no child should recognize. Evelyn had grown numb to it, almost. Sometimes, when sleep finally came, she still saw her parents' faces as they'd pushed her into the cellar moments before their home collapsed under American bombs meant for German ammunition stores. "Stay quiet," her mother had whispered, her last words before the world exploded. Evelyn's fingers, raw and filthy, dug into the pockets of her tattered coat as she pushed herself away from the wall. Nothing. Not even crumbs remained. The charred streets echoed with her footsteps as she darted between ruins, eyes constantly scanning for the glint of discarded tins or forgotten scraps. Each doorway might hide salvation or soldiers. Each shadow might be safety or death. A sudden blast in the distance made her drop instinctively to the frozen ground, heart hammering against her ribs like a terrified animal trying to escape its cage. Her palms pressed against the earth, feeling its solidity, its coldness, then something else. A vibration, faint but rhythmic, not like bombs or tanks or planes. Something different. Thump, thump, thump. Evelyn pressed her ear to the ground, holding her breath, certain her mind was playing tricks. Hunger did that. It made you imagine impossible things, like your mother's voice calling your name or the smell of fresh bread. Thump, thump, thump. This was real. Something, someone, was beneath the earth, creating those desperate, fading beats. The realization hit her with physical force, sending electric shivers across her skin. Someone buried alive? The thought made her throat close. Her nails began to scrape at the frozen dirt before her mind had even processed what she was doing. The cold burned her fingers, but something stronger than pain drove her forward. Small hands became claws, digging with the primal urgency of an animal. She wasn't thinking of Germans or patrols or neighbors who would sell out anyone for an extra ration card. She was thinking only of the fading rhythm beneath the ground, a heartbeat perhaps, or a fist pounding in final desperation. "Please," she whispered to no one, to everyone. "Please be alive." The skin around her fingernails split and bled, leaving crimson smears across the disturbed earth. Minutes felt like hours. The street remained deserted, a blessing in this cursed place. As she dug deeper, faster, breath coming in short, painful gasps that crystallized in the winter air. When her fingers struck something that wasn't earth, something that yielded like flesh, Evelyn couldn't suppress the small cry that escaped her lips. She froze, listening for approaching footsteps, hearing nothing but distant artillery and her own thundering pulse. Then she resumed digging with renewed fervor, clearing dirt from what was unmistakably a human face. Not a German uniform. American. The realization struck her with both relief and fresh terror. Germans shot anyone harboring Allied soldiers. They shot the soldiers too, of course, but only after making examples of them. Evelyn had seen what happened to collaborators, their bodies displayed in the town square for days. The soldier's face was gray beneath a mask of dirt, lips blue-tinged, eyelids fluttering weakly. But he was alive. Somehow. His chest rose and fell in shallow movements beneath more earth that she frantically cleared away. How long had he been here? How had he survived? Questions raced through her mind as her hands worked. "I'll get you out," she whispered in broken English, words her father had taught her before the war. "Stay breathing." The man's eyelids fluttered more intensely now as oxygen reached him. She cleared his nose and mouth completely, watching as he took a desperate, rattling breath that seemed to shake his entire frame. His eyes opened, startlingly blue against the filth and blood, focusing slowly on her face with an intensity that made Evelyn's movements falter. Those eyes, they weren't disoriented or confused. They were looking at her with recognition. Impossible. Yet the feeling crawled up her spine like icy fingers. Something wasn't right. Why would an American soldier be buried here, in this forgotten street, not in a mass grave or a battlefield? Why was he alone? And why did he seem to know her? As she cleared more dirt from around his shoulders, revealing a torn uniform caked with blood both fresh and dried, the soldier's hand suddenly shot up, grasping her wrist with surprising strength. Evelyn bit back a scream, instinct nearly making her bolt. His grip was desperate, his eyes never leaving hers. His cracked lips parted with obvious effort. The sound that emerged was barely a whisper, a ghost of a voice, dry as the grave that had nearly claimed him. Evelyn. Her name. Her actual name. The world seemed to tilt violently beneath her knees. How could this stranger know who she was? Cold terror flooded her veins, replacing the compassion that had driven her to dig. She tried to pull away, but his grip tightened, his eyes pleading, desperate. "How do you—" she began, but the words died in her throat as the distant sound of German voices carried on the wind. Patrol, coming closer. The soldier heard it too. His eyes widened with a fear that mirrored her own. Whatever mystery connected them would have to wait. Discovery meant death for them both. She had seconds to decide, leave him and run, or commit to saving a man who somehow knew her name, who carried secrets she couldn't begin to imagine. His fingers relaxed their grip on her wrist, giving her the choice. Run or stay, live or possibly die. In that moment, staring into the eyes of a stranger who wasn't a stranger, Evelyn made the decision that would change everything. Evelyn. The soldier's voice lingered in the frigid air, her name like a prayer on his lips. She jerked backward, losing balance and falling onto her haunches in the dirt. The blood in her veins turned to ice, not from the bitter cold that had claimed her fingertips, but from the impossibility of what she'd just heard. "How do you know my name?" Her voice cracked, barely a whisper, as she glanced frantically down the street. The German patrol's footsteps echoed against crumbling buildings, still distant but approaching with the methodical certainty of death itself. The soldier's cracked lips parted again. "Please," he rasped. "They'll come back. Hide me." His eyes, the palest blue she'd ever seen, like winter sky trapped in glass, darted toward the sound of boots. "They'll kill us both." Evelyn's hands trembled, dirt and blood caking her skin in abstract patterns of survival and fear. Every instinct screamed to run, to disappear into the maze of destroyed streets she knew better than anyone still living. A 12-year-old orphan was invisible in this war, until she wasn't, until she became an example. But something stopped her. Perhaps it was the hunger making her thoughts blur at the edges. Perhaps it was the crushing loneliness of having spoken to no one but herself for weeks. Or perhaps it was the mystery of her name on a dying stranger's lips. "I can't carry you," she whispered, decision made even as she spoke. "But I know where to go." Working with desperate speed, she cleared enough dirt for him to move his arms. His uniform was shredded, dark with old blood and fresh wounds reopening. Together, in a grotesque dance of pain and determination, they extracted him from his shallow grave. He bit back sounds of agony that leaked through clenched teeth as half-frozen limbs were forced to move. The German voices grew louder. 3 streets away, maybe 2. "Schneller," she hissed, adopting the enemy's language by instinct. "Faster." The soldier leaned heavily against her small frame as they stumbled between bombed-out buildings. Evelyn led him through narrow passages between collapsed walls, places only a child could know. Her sanctuary waited ahead, the cellar of a destroyed bakery, its entrance hidden behind fallen beams that she'd arranged to look like random destruction. The smell of old yeast and newer mold filled her nostrils as she pushed aside the concealed entrance. "Down," she commanded, helping him navigate the steep, broken steps. The darkness swallowed them whole as she carefully replaced their cover, sealing them into the damp blackness that had been her home since the bombs fell. In the silence that followed, broken only by their labored breathing, Evelyn fumbled for the stub of candle she'd been saving. The flint sparked twice before catching, casting sickly yellow light across their faces. The soldier looked worse in the illumination, skin gray-white beneath streaks of blood and dirt, eyes sunken into dark hollows. Death had released him from its jaws only reluctantly. "Water," he croaked. Evelyn hesitated, then reached for her precious bottle, collected drop by drop from rain. She tipped it to his lips, watching him drink with the controlled desperation of someone who knows salvation can kill if taken too quickly. "Who are you?" she demanded when he'd finished, keeping her distance now that the initial crisis had passed. "How do you know my name?" The soldier slumped against the wall, eyes closing briefly as pain washed over his features. When they opened again, something had changed in their expression, a calculation, a guardedness that hadn't been there before. "James," he said simply. "My name is James." The name hung in the damp air between them, offering nothing, no explanation, no connection to her. No reason why an American soldier buried alive would recognize a French orphan. "That doesn't answer my question." Evelyn's voice hardened with courage she didn't feel. "Nobody here knows my name anymore. They're all dead." A spasm crossed James's face. Was it pain or something else? His gaze dropped to the dirt floor. "I need to stay hidden," he said instead of answering. "Not just from the Germans, from everyone." Evelyn noticed then what seemed wrong before. He wasn't asking to be returned to American lines, wasn't begging for help contacting his unit. A chill crawled up her spine that had nothing to do with the cellar's dampness. "You're running from your own people," she said. Not a question. James's head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "You're too smart for your own good. Smart enough to stay alive when everyone else died." The words came out bitter, hard-edged. She'd earned that pride. As she moved to check if the entrance remained secure, the candlelight caught something in James's uniform, paper edges, yellowed and creased, poking from inside his torn jacket. Her scavenger's instinct recognized value instantly. Papers meant information. Information could be traded for food, for medicine, for safety. With reflexes honed by hunger, her small hand darted forward, fingers closing around the corner of what felt like several folded sheets. She'd barely begun to pull when James's hand clamped around her wrist with bruising force. "No!" The shout exploded in the small space, echoing against stone walls. Evelyn froze, terror washing through her. The sound seemed loud enough to reach the street above, loud enough to summon every German within a mile. Her free hand flew to his mouth, pressing against his lips with desperate pressure. "Are you trying to kill us?" she hissed when the echo faded. His grip on her wrist loosened slightly, but his eyes burned with a fever that had nothing to do with his injuries. "Those papers stay with me," he said, voice lowered but intense. "They're why I was buried. They're why I can't go back." Evelyn wrenched her hand away, rubbing her wrist where purple marks were already forming. "You're insane," she whispered. "You're going to get us both killed." The silence that followed was broken by a sound that stopped her heart, the creak of a floorboard directly above them. Someone was in the ruins. Heavy footsteps moved across what remained of the bakery floor, deliberate and searching. Dust sifted down from between the boards, dancing in the candlelight like snow. Evelyn extinguished the candle with trembling fingers. Darkness enveloped them, thick and complete. She could feel rather than see James tense beside her, his breathing shallow and controlled now. Professional, trained. This was a soldier who knew how to hide, how to hunt, how to kill. The footsteps stopped directly overhead. A beam of light pierced through a crack between floorboards, sweeping slowly across the cellar. Evelyn pressed herself against the wall, willing her body to melt into the stones. The light paused, retreated, then returned to the same spot. A deliberate search, not a random patrol. The door at the top of the cellar stairs groaned. Someone was testing it, pushing against the debris she'd arranged as camouflage. Evelyn's heart threatened to break through her ribcage as the pressure against the door increased. The debris shifted, a small cascade of plaster dust raining down. Another push, and their hiding place would be exposed. She closed her eyes, wondering if bullets hurt as much as they seemed to in the faces of those she'd seen executed. A voice called out in German from outside the building. The pressure on the door ceased immediately. The footsteps retreated, boards creaking in diminishing sequence as whoever had been searching moved away to respond to the summons. Minutes passed like hours before Evelyn dared to breathe normally again. When she finally struck the flint to relight the candle, her hands shook so badly that it took 4 attempts. The amber light revealed James watching her with an expression she couldn't read, something between calculation and guilt. He still clutched the papers protectively against his chest. "That was close," he murmured, eyes fixed on the ceiling. "Too close," Evelyn agreed, swallowing the bitter taste of fear. "Someone knows you're here. Someone's looking for you specifically." Before James could respond, another sound reached them, the distinctive creak of the bakery's side door. Different footsteps now, lighter but no less purposeful. The sound of someone who knew exactly where they were going. "They're coming back," James whispered, reaching for a broken piece of wood to use as a weapon. Evelyn's blood ran cold. The side entrance led directly to the cellar stairs. Whoever was coming knew about her hiding place. The debris at the top of the stairs shifted, then moved deliberately aside. A rectangle of gray daylight appeared. A shadow fell across it. "I know you're down there," came a woman's voice, measured and calm. "And I know what you're hiding." The shadow elongated down the cellar stairs as Evelyn's lungs seized with terror. She recognized that voice, the distinct cadence of Madame Colette, a woman whose survival had become currency in this broken town. The neighbor had outlasted most others not through luck, but through calculated betrayal, trading secrets to the Germans in exchange for extra rations, for warmth, for life itself. Evelyn instinctively moved in front of James, as if her small frame could somehow shield him. The absurdity wasn't lost on her. A half-starved 12-year-old protecting a soldier, but some desperate part of her mind believed that Madame Colette might spare a child while condemning a man. The woman descended 3 steps, her silhouette framed in the gray winter light. Once elegant, now gaunt, Madame Colette's face had sharpened into angles that never smiled. Her eyes, dark and knowing, scanned the cellar, pausing first on Evelyn before shifting to the shadowy corner where James pressed himself against the wall, papers still clutched to his chest. "What an interesting pet you found, little mouse," she said, voice like silk over gravel. Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. "I fell," she blurted, the lie forming before conscious thought. "I was looking for food in the ruins and fell. Cut myself." She held up her dirt-encrusted hands, where blood from her digging had dried in dark crescents under her fingernails. Madame Colette's eyebrow arched with practiced skepticism. "And I suppose you fell onto an American soldier as well? How convenient." Lead seemed to fill Evelyn's stomach. The woman's eyes slid deliberately to the corner again, to the unmistakable shape of a man barely concealed by shadow. A small, terrible smile curved Madame Colette's lips. "The patrols are looking for someone," she continued conversationally, as if discussing the weather in peacetime. "They say a grave was disturbed, a very special grave that wasn't meant to be found." Her gaze lingered on the blood-stained uniform, the mud-caked boots. "They're quite upset about it." Silence stretched like a wire between them, taut enough to snap. James remained perfectly still, his breathing so controlled he might have been a corpse after all. Evelyn felt sweat trickle down her spine despite the cellar's chill. I don't know what you're talking about, Evelyn said, her voice smaller than she intended. Please, Madame Colette, I haven't done anything. The woman descended another step, then another, her movements deliberate. The flickering candlelight caught the hollows of her cheeks, the calculation in her eyes. No? Then why is your little hiding place suddenly occupied by a man who should be dead? She paused, head tilting slightly. A man the Germans buried, but who somehow knew where to find you. The question landed like a physical blow. Evelyn's breath caught. She hadn't considered that. How James had known her name, yes, but not how he had known to come to her. The realization must have shown on her face because Madame Colette's smile widened fractionally. You didn't think of that, did you, child? She reached the bottom of the stairs now, standing fully in the cellar. You've always been clever, Evelyn. Too clever for your own good. Your parents worried about that. The mention of her parents sent a spike of pain through Evelyn's chest. Don't talk about them. No? They were good people. Too good for this world. Madame Colette's eyes never left James. I wonder what they would think of their daughter harboring a man who brings death with him. James stirred then, shifting forward slightly. She's just a child, he said, his American accent thick against Madame Colette's French-inflected English. She found me by accident. Let her go and I'll come quietly. The woman laughed, a sound like breaking glass. How noble, but unnecessary. Her gaze swung back to Evelyn. I haven't seen you. I haven't seen him. As far as I'm concerned, this cellar is as empty as my stomach. The implication hung heavy in the damp air. Evelyn understood immediately. Madame Colette wasn't here to turn them in, at least not yet. She was here to negotiate, to extract payment for her silence, the currency of survival. I don't have anything to give you, Evelyn said, hating the tremor in her voice. No food, nothing. No. Madame Colette's eyes flicked meaningfully to the papers James still guarded. I think you have something very valuable indeed. Something worth far more than bread or cheese. She took a step closer, and Evelyn could smell the faint lavender water the woman somehow still possessed, an incongruous scent of civilization in their feral existence. James tensed visibly. These papers aren't for trade. Everything is for trade now, soldier. Everything has a price. Madame Colette's voice hardened. The Germans are searching house by house. When they find this cellar, and they will find it, what do you think happens to little Evelyn? To me, you know what they do to those who hide the enemy. Public execution. Evelyn had seen it 7 times since the occupation began. The latest had been old Monsieur Pascal, caught with a British radio. They had made the entire street watch. If you want to survive, Madame Colette continued, her words landing like stones, see me before sundown. I can help you both disappear, for the right price. She turned toward the stairs, then paused, looking back over her shoulder. The alternative is less pleasant for all of us. The threat lingered as she ascended, each step creaking under her weight. At the top, she carefully replaced the debris, sealing them once more in near darkness, the candle's flame guttering in a sudden draft. Silence descended, broken only by their breathing. Evelyn's mind raced, calculating possibilities, escape routes, bargains, all the arithmetic of survival she'd mastered since the bombs fell. She's going to betray us, Evelyn whispered finally. She always does. That's how she survives. James pushed himself up straighter, wincing as damaged muscles protested. She hasn't yet. She could have brought the Germans with her. She's waiting for the highest bidder. Evelyn's voice was bitter beyond her years. First, she'll see what you'll give her. If the Germans offer more, the unspoken conclusion hung between them. What's in those papers? She asked suddenly. What's worth dying for? Worth killing for? James looked down at the folded sheet still clutched in his hand. His knuckles whitened as his grip tightened. The truth, he said simply, the kind that gets buried with those who know it. Something in his tone sent a chill through Evelyn. She remembered his earlier panic when she'd tried to take the papers, the raw fear in his eyes. The truth about what? She pressed. Before he could answer, the sound of boots above them froze them both. Heavy, purposeful steps moved across the bakery floor, many pairs this time. German voices called to each other, the harsh consonants unmistakable even through the ceiling. They're searching the building, James whispered, struggling to stand. We need to move. Evelyn shook her head frantically. There's nowhere to go. The cellar door is the only way out. Desperation clawed at her throat as the footsteps grew louder, more focused. A beam of light pierced through the floorboards again, sweeping more systematically than before. James pressed himself into the deepest shadows, papers now tucked inside his shirt. Evelyn blew out the candle, plunging them into blackness. The darkness was absolute, but it offered false comfort. The Germans were thorough. They would find the cellar entrance just as Madame Colette had. A crash above them, furniture being overturned. Another beam of light, brighter, more directly focused. They were getting closer. Then, unexpectedly, a woman's voice called out from outside the building. Madame Colette's voice, shrill with feigned panic. Officers! Officers! I saw someone running behind the church, a man in an American uniform. The searching stopped instantly. Orders were barked, boots thundered toward the street. The diversion worked. For now. When silence returned, Evelyn released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. In the darkness, she felt rather than saw James moving toward her. Why would she help us? He whispered. She didn't, Evelyn replied with certainty. She bought time for us to decide what we'll give her. The cynicism in her voice belonged to someone far older. We have until sundown. Then she either gets what she wants, or we get a bullet. The darkness concealed James's expression, but Evelyn heard the rustle of paper as he withdrew the documents from his shirt. When he finally spoke, his voice was changed, harder, colder. Get me a light. Evelyn fumbled for the flint, hands shaking as she relit the candle stub. The flame cast his face in harsh relief, transforming it. Gone was the desperate, injured man she'd pulled from the earth. In his place sat someone dangerous, a hunter rather than prey. James unfolded one of the papers, holding it so only he could see its contents. Your friend wants these documents. She doesn't understand what she's asking for. She's not my friend, Evelyn corrected sharply. No. James looked up, his eyes reflecting the candlelight like a predator's. And after today, she might be your worst enemy. He refolded the paper with deliberate precision. Because I'm not giving her anything. The cellar seemed to grow colder with his words. Evelyn stared at him, suddenly unsure who she feared more, the Germans above or the American beside her. Then we're dead, she said simply. James's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Not yet, not today. He leaned forward, the motion making him wince with pain. But first, you need to know why she recognized me, why I knew your name. He paused, something like regret flickering across his features. And why I came to find you before they buried me. The candle flickered between them, casting monstrous shadows that climbed the cellar walls like living things. Evelyn hugged her knees to her chest, making herself smaller as James's words hung in the damp air. He'd come looking for her, deliberately, before they buried him alive. Tell me, she demanded, voice barely above a whisper. All of it. James pressed his palm against his side where blood had seeped through his uniform, creating a dark stain that grew larger by the hour. His face glistened with sweat despite the cellar's chill. Fever was setting in. Evelyn had seen it enough times to recognize the signs. Without medicine, infection would claim him within days. I was part of a special operations unit, he began, each word measured carefully. We weren't regular army. We operated behind enemy lines, but not always against the Germans. His eyes met hers, searching for comprehension. Sometimes our targets were our own people. Evelyn's brow furrowed. Americans killing Americans? Why? War creates opportunities. James's voice turned bitter. For power, for profit, for settling old scores. Some officers saw a chance to eliminate civilians who knew too much, who had witnessed things that would destroy reputations, end careers, maybe even lead to war crime trials. He unfolded one of the documents with trembling fingers, angling it toward the candlelight. Evelyn caught glimpses of official stamps, signatures, coordinates. 3 nights ago, I was ordered to accompany a group to a village 10 miles from here. We were told it was a German intelligence outpost. His eyes closed briefly, the memory visibly painful. It wasn't. It was just families, refugees. But the order came to eliminate everyone anyway. No witnesses. Horror crawled up Evelyn's spine. You killed innocent people? No. The word came out sharp, definitive. I refused. I tried to stop it. But I was just one man against 6 others who were following orders without question. His fingers tightened on the paper until it crumpled. I managed to save some of the children by hiding them in a root cellar. But the adults, 23 civilians executed and recorded as enemy combatants. The number hung in the air between them. 23 lives erased with bureaucratic efficiency, transformed from victims to statistics with the stroke of a pen. These papers prove it wasn't just a mistake or soldiers gone rogue. It was planned, sanctioned by officers who knew exactly what they were doing. There are names, dates, falsified intelligence reports created before the mission to justify it afterward. Evelyn stared at the papers, suddenly understanding their deadly value. So they tried to kill you too. James nodded, a humorless smile twisting his lips. My commanding officer shot me himself. Said I was a liability, a traitor. They buried me in that unmarked grave, probably reported me killed in action by German fire. His eyes took on a distant quality. They were sloppy, though. The bullet missed anything vital, and they didn't dig deep enough. I regained consciousness under the dirt and managed to claw my way up just enough to breathe. But how did you know my name? Why come looking for me? Evelyn pressed, the central mystery still unsolved. James hesitated, conflict visible on his face. Your father, he said finally. Henri Dubois. I knew him. The name, her name, spoken aloud after so many months sent a physical shock through Evelyn's body. No one had called her Evelyn Dubois since the bombs fell, since her parents disappeared under the rubble of their home. She'd become just another nameless orphan, a scavenging ghost in a dead town. My father? She whispered. How? He was our contact in this region, a resistance informant working with Allied intelligence. James's voice softened. One of the best. He saved my life twice last year, guiding my team through German checkpoints. He spoke of you often, his clever daughter who could solve puzzles no one else could, who noticed things others missed. Tears burned unexpectedly behind Evelyn's eyes. She blinked them back furiously, unwilling to show weakness. He never told me. He couldn't. It would have put you in danger. James winced as he shifted position. The last time I saw him, 3 months ago, he made me promise that if anything happened to him, I'd make sure you were safe. He gave me descriptions of your hiding places, including this cellar. The revelation struck Evelyn like a physical blow. Her father, the quiet bookkeeper she'd known all her life, had been living a dangerous double existence, passing information to the Allies while maintaining the facade of an ordinary civilian. How many times had he slipped away at night, offering vague explanations she'd accepted without question? How many coded conversations had she witnessed without understanding? When I escaped that grave, I was half delirious, James continued. I knew I couldn't go back to my unit. They'd just finished the job. I remembered your father's words, his description of this place. It seemed providential, a safe haven if only temporarily. A bitter laugh escaped Evelyn's throat. Safe? The Germans are hunting us, and Madame Colette is ready to sell us to the highest bidder. I never said it was a good plan, James admitted. I was bleeding out, barely conscious. I just needed to get somewhere, to someone I could trust with these. He tapped the papers. Your father trusted you. That was enough for me. The distant rumble of artillery punctuated his words, the constant soundtrack of their precarious existence growing louder. The front was moving closer. Evelyn felt the vibrations through the cellar floor, watching dust sift down from the ceiling with each impact. The Americans are advancing, she observed. Your people. Not my people anymore, James replied grimly. Not after what I've seen, what I know. The men who tried to kill me are still out there, still giving orders, still deciding who lives and dies on both sides of the line. Another explosion, closer this time, rattled the foundation of the building. A crack appeared in the far wall, zigzagging from floor to ceiling like lightning frozen in stone. "If the front reaches us, there will be chaos," Evelyn said, mind racing ahead. "Maybe enough to slip away unnoticed." James shook his head. "Chaos just means more bullets flying, more chances to die, and I'm in no condition to run." He gestured to his bloodied side. "This needs treatment soon, or it won't matter what Madame Colette decides to do." The mention of the woman brought Evelyn back to their immediate predicament. Sundown was approaching. They needed a plan. "We could give her part of the documents," she suggested. "Enough to satisfy her, but not the most damning evidence." "And then what?" "She trades them to the Germans, who realize there are more. They'll tear the town apart looking for the rest." James's voice was strained. "These papers don't just implicate a few officers. They reveal a pattern of civilian massacres being covered up at the highest levels. If the Germans got hold of them, they'd use it as propaganda to turn French civilians against American forces across the entire front." The implications sank in. These weren't just documents. They were weapons as deadly as any bomb or bullet. "Then what do we do?" Evelyn asked, the weight of their situation pressing down like the earth of James's grave. "We can't run. We can't fight. We can't hide forever." James was silent for a long moment, eyes fixed on the flickering candle flame. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed, a resolve hardening beneath the pain. "There's a French resistance courier who operates in this sector. Henri, your father, mentioned him. Goes by the code name Bishop. If we could get these papers to him, he could smuggle them to London, to people who would use them properly, hold the right people accountable." "And how do we find this Bishop?" Evelyn asked, skepticism evident in her voice. Before James could answer, the ground shook violently. This explosion was much closer, blocks away, not miles. Dirt and small stones rained down from the ceiling. The candle toppled, plunging them into darkness until Evelyn scrambled to right it. In the renewed light, she saw fear flash across James's face, not for himself, but as he looked up at the groaning beams above them. "The bombardment's getting closer," he said unnecessarily. "This building won't take a direct hit." Evelyn felt panic rising in her chest. "We need to move." "Where?" James gestured around the small cellar. "Every street is a death sentence right now. Germans on one side, American artillery on the other." As if to emphasize his point, voices shouted in German above them, boots pounding across the floor as soldiers sought shelter from the barrage. Evelyn and James froze, barely breathing as the enemy moved directly overhead, oblivious to the fugitives beneath their feet. "They're using the bakery ruins as a forward position," James whispered once the movement settled. "We're trapped." Evelyn closed her eyes, forcing her racing thoughts to slow. There had to be a way out. Her father had trusted her cleverness. James had sought her out based on that reputation. She wouldn't fail them now. "Madame Colette," she said suddenly, opening her eyes. "She's our only chance." "The woman who's blackmailing us?" James's voice was incredulous. "She survives by trading in secrets and favors," Evelyn explained, the plan forming as she spoke. "She plays all sides, Germans, resistance, black marketeers. If anyone knows how to find this Bishop, it's her." James studied her face in the wavering light. "You're suggesting we give her what she wants?" "I'm suggesting we give her something more valuable than those papers," Evelyn replied, a hardness in her voice that hadn't been there before. "A connection to Bishop, commission on whatever deal they make." Her lips curved in a smile that belonged on someone much older, much more cynical. "Madame Colette doesn't want justice or truth. She wants advantage, power. We can offer her that without sacrificing the evidence." Above them, the Germans were setting up what sounded like a radio, voices clipped and urgent as they established their position. Another shell landed somewhere nearby, close enough to make the walls shudder. James's eyes never left Evelyn's face. "You're your father's daughter," he said finally, something like respect in his voice. "But this plan depends on getting to Madame Colette before sundown. With Germans above us and bombs falling, how exactly do we manage that?" Evelyn's gaze shifted to the crack in the wall, now wider after the last impact. "I think," she said slowly, "it's time I showed you why my father called me the little mouse." Evelyn moved to the cracked wall, her small fingers tracing the jagged line as it zigzagged from floor to ceiling. The German's boots scraped overhead, furniture dragging across floorboards as they established their position. Every few minutes, another explosion rocked the ground, each one feeling closer than the last. "The buildings in this part of town are old," she whispered. "Most of them share walls, and underneath—" She pressed her shoulder against the widest part of the crack and pushed. A section of brick and mortar shifted slightly, revealing darkness beyond. The cellars connect, smugglers' tunnels from before the First War. James stared at the opening in disbelief. "You knew about this the whole time?" "I wasn't sure it was still passable," she admitted, continuing to work at the crumbling mortar. "After the last bombardment, many of the passages collapsed. But this one—" She grunted with effort as a larger chunk of wall gave way, creating an opening barely wide enough for a child to squeeze through. "This one might still work." Another shell landed somewhere nearby, rattling dust from the ceiling. A German voice shouted orders above them, panic evident even in the foreign syllables. "They're getting nervous," James observed, dragging himself closer to the opening despite his wounds. "The front's moving faster than they expected." Evelyn had managed to create a gap just wide enough for her shoulders. She peered into the darkness, trying to make out anything beyond. "I'll go first," she whispered. "See if it's clear. You make the hole bigger." Before James could protest, she'd slipped through the gap like water, finding the path of least resistance, disappearing into the blackness beyond. The candlelight revealed nothing but the tips of her fingers as she worked at the opening from the other side, dislodging more debris. "It's stable," her voice came through, hollow and distant. "The passage is intact for at least 20 feet. I think it leads toward the square." James attacked the opening with renewed vigor, ignoring the fresh blood seeping through his bandages as he strained against the centuries-old mortar. His military-trained muscles, even in their weakened state, accomplished in minutes what might have taken Evelyn hours. Soon, the gap was wide enough for a man to pass through, albeit with difficulty. "Bring the candle," Evelyn urged. James hesitated, glancing upward. "If we take it and they come down, they'll know someone was here regardless," she countered. "We need light more than deception now." Conceding to her logic, James carefully lifted the precious candle and squeezed through the opening, biting back a groan as the rough edges scraped against his wounded side. The passage beyond was low-ceilinged and narrow, forcing him to hunch uncomfortably as he followed Evelyn into the unknown. The tunnel smelled of wet earth and decay, the walls slick with moisture that gleamed in the candlelight. Centuries of wine smugglers, resistance fighters, and desperate souls had traversed these forgotten pathways beneath the town, their passing marked only by occasional debris, a rusted lantern hook, the remains of a wooden crate, a child's shoe abandoned in haste. "How did you find these?" James whispered as they moved deeper into the labyrinth. "My father showed me," Evelyn replied without looking back. "After the occupation began, he said they might save my life someday." A bitter note entered her voice. "He didn't tell me he was resistance, just that bad men might come looking, and I should know how to disappear." They came to a junction where 3 passages converged. Evelyn paused, her face scrunched in concentration as she oriented herself. "This way," she decided, pointing to the right-hand tunnel. "It should lead behind Madame Colette's building." The passage narrowed further, forcing James to turn sideways at points. His breathing labored in the confined space. Evelyn glanced back at him with poorly concealed concern. "You're bleeding again," she observed. "I'll manage." His jaw was set in a tight line that belied the casual dismissal. Evelyn seemed about to press the issue when a different sound reached them. Voices, muffled but distinct, filtering down through the ceiling of the tunnel. They froze, instinctively pressing themselves against the damp walls. "Hiding something. The girl knows more than she admits." The voice was unmistakably Madame Colette's, her French-accented English carrying clearly through whatever thin barrier separated them from the speaker. A man's voice responded, the words indistinct, but the tone unmistakably German. Madame Colette's response, however, came through perfectly. "Of course I will tell you if I find anything. Haven't I always been helpful?" A pause. But information like this deserves appropriate compensation. Evelyn and James exchanged glances in the flickering light. The betrayal was happening already. Madame Colette hadn't even waited for sundown. "We need to move," James mouthed silently. They crept forward, agonizingly slow to avoid making any noise that might alert those above to their presence. The voices faded as they progressed, eventually disappearing altogether. "She's already sold us out," Evelyn whispered, her young face hardened with the knowledge of yet another betrayal. "She never intended to wait." "Which means we have even less time," James replied grimly. "How much further?" "Close." "There should be—" Evelyn's words cut off as she rounded a bend in the tunnel and confronted a wall of collapsed debris blocking their path completely. "No," she breathed, the single syllable laden with despair. James held the candle higher, illuminating the extent of the blockage. Recent bombardment had caused the ceiling to cave in, filling the passage with broken beams, bricks, and compacted earth. There would be no getting through. "Is there another way?" he asked, fighting to keep the desperation from his voice. Evelyn's eyes darted around the tunnel, calculating distances and directions. "Maybe. We'd have to go back to the junction, take the left passage. But it leads away from Madame Colette's, toward the church instead." Another distant explosion punctuated her words, followed by the closer rattle of machine gun fire. The front line was creeping inexorably toward them. "The church, then," James decided. "We need to get above ground, find another approach." They retraced their steps as quickly as James's condition allowed, the pain evident in his increasingly labored breathing. At the junction, they took the left-hand tunnel, moving into unknown territory. This passage was older, narrower, the ceiling so low that James had to crouch painfully. "There should be a way up near the church crypt," Evelyn explained as they progressed. "If it hasn't collapsed too." They had traveled perhaps 100 yards when Evelyn stopped so suddenly that James nearly collided with her. She raised a hand in warning, pointing to a thin shaft of daylight penetrating the darkness ahead. A way out, but voices drifted down from above, speaking rapid-fire German. "Patrol," James whispered, recognizing the clipped tones of military communication. They waited in tense silence, barely breathing as boots scraped across stone above them. Minutes stretched like hours until finally the voices receded, leaving only distant echoes. "Now," Evelyn urged, hurrying toward the light source. It was a narrow grate set into what appeared to be the floor of the church's side chapel. Evelyn pressed her face against it, peering cautiously in all directions before nodding to James. "Clear for the moment, but they're all over the square, dozens of them." James joined her, looking up through the rusted bars. The church was a skeleton of its former self, roofless in sections with sunlight streaming through gaping holes where stained glass had once filtered the light into holy patterns. German soldiers moved in and out of view, establishing defensive positions among the pews and behind the altar. "They're preparing for a last stand," James observed, professional assessment overriding personal concerns. "They know they can't hold the town." Evelyn was already working at the grate, small fingers probing the ancient mechanism that held it in place. "If they're preparing for battle, they'll be focused outward, not on us." The lock resisted her efforts. "I need something to pry this open." James produced a combat knife from his boot, somehow still in his possession despite everything, and worked it into the gap between grate and stone. With a groan of protesting metal, the lock gave way. Evelyn pushed the grate up cautiously, creating the smallest opening possible to slip through. She emerged behind a fallen statue of some unrecognizable saint, using it as cover while she surveyed their surroundings. James followed with considerably more difficulty, his face white with pain as he hauled himself into the church. "We need to move quickly," she whispered, already plotting a path along the shadowed wall. "There's a side door that leads to an alley behind Madame Colette's building." They crept from shadow to shadow, freezing whenever a German soldier glanced in their direction. The church floor was littered with debris, fallen masonry, shattered pews, and things neither wanted to examine too closely. Outside, the artillery barrage had intensified, the Germans inside the church shouting coordinates into field radios, trying to direct counter-battery fire. They had almost reached the side door when disaster struck. A shell landed just outside the church wall, the concussion sending James staggering sideways into a pile of broken furniture. The crash drew the attention of every soldier in the vicinity. Shouts in German filled the air. A bullet splintered stone inches from Evelyn's head. "Run!" James yelled, abandoning stealth entirely as he shoved her toward the door. They burst into the alley as bullets chased them, peppering the doorframe and wall. Evelyn ran with the practiced desperation of a child who had learned that speed meant survival. James followed, each step a fresh agony, blood flowing freely now from his reopened wound. The alley twisted between bombed-out buildings, offering momentary cover from their pursuers. German voices echoed behind them, the methodical sounds of a hunting party spreading out to cut off escape routes. "This way," Evelyn gasped, pulling James down a narrower passage between two partially collapsed walls. They emerged into a small courtyard, surrounded on three sides by buildings. Evelyn's face fell as she realized they'd hit a dead end. The only way out was back the way they'd come, directly into the path of their pursuers. "Up there," James pointed to a half-destroyed staircase clinging to one building's exterior wall. "Second floor. We might find another way across the rooftops." Evelyn was already scrambling up the precarious steps, loose bricks shifting under her feet. James followed more slowly, each step sending waves of dizziness through him as blood loss took its toll. He was 3 steps from the top when his foot went through a rotted board. The crack echoed in the courtyard like a gunshot. James wrenched his leg free, tearing flesh in the process, and hauled himself onto the second-floor landing where Evelyn waited, eyes wide with fear. Below, German voices grew louder. They'd heard the noise, were converging on the courtyard from multiple directions. "In here," Evelyn whispered, pushing through a doorway into what had once been someone's apartment. They'd barely made it inside when the first German soldier appeared in the courtyard below. James pulled Evelyn down behind an overturned table as flashlight beams swept the buildings. "We're trapped," she breathed, the reality of their situation sinking in at last. James pressed the folded papers into her hands, his eyes intense in the dim light filtering through shattered windows. "Whatever happens next," he whispered, "these need to survive. You need to survive." The soldiers were approaching the staircase now, boots crunching on broken glass. Orders were being shouted, positions coordinated for a thorough search. "Madame Colette's building is just across that gap," Evelyn said, pointing to a narrow space between their current position and the adjacent rooftop. "If we could jump—" "You could jump," James corrected, looking down at his blood-soaked side. "I wouldn't make it 10 feet. Understanding dawned in Evelyn's eyes. "No," she said fiercely. "I'm not leaving you." James gripped her shoulders, his expression more serious than she'd yet seen. "Your father didn't die for you to throw your life away. These papers, what they reveal, it's bigger than both of us." His voice dropped even lower as the Germans began ascending the stairs. "Find Bishop. Complete the mission. That's how you save me." Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes, but she blinked them away, jaw setting in determination. She tucked the papers securely inside her tattered coat. "I'll come back for you," she promised. James smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his pain-ravaged face. "I know you will, little mouse." As the Germans reached the second-floor landing, James moved with sudden purpose toward the doorway, away from Evelyn's hiding spot. "Hey!" he shouted in English, drawing their attention completely to himself. "Looking for me?" Chaos erupted. Shouts, gunfire, the thunder of boots as every soldier converged on James's position. In that moment of perfect distraction, Evelyn slipped to the window, gauged the distance to the next roof, and jumped into the unknown darkness, the precious papers clutched against her chest. The gap between buildings seemed to widen impossibly as Evelyn hung suspended in air, time stretching like pulled taffy. Behind her, gunfire erupted in staccato bursts, each shot a punctuation mark in James's desperate gambit to buy her escape. Then gravity reclaimed her, pulling her small body toward the adjacent rooftop with terrifying speed. She hit hard, the impact driving air from her lungs as she rolled across broken tiles. Pain exploded in her shoulder, but instinct kept her moving. scrambling on hands and knees behind a chimney stack as bullets splintered masonry where she'd landed seconds before. The Germans had spotted her jump. Pressing her back against the chimney, Evelyn fought to control her breathing, to quiet the ragged gasps that threatened to give away her position. The papers James had entrusted to her crinkled against her chest, their weight suddenly heavier than any physical burden she'd carried in her 12 years of life. She felt for them frantically, ensuring they hadn't been damaged or lost in her desperate leap. More shouting from the building she'd escaped. Orders barked in German, then, sickeningly, the sound of fists against flesh. They were beating James. The knowledge twisted in her gut like a knife, but she remained frozen, honoring his sacrifice the only way possible, by surviving. From her position, Evelyn could see directly into what remained of Madame Colette's apartment. The front-facing wall had been blown away months ago, leaving the interior exposed like a macabre dollhouse. The woman herself was visible through the shattered windows, pacing back and forth, occasionally pausing to listen to the commotion outside. She appeared agitated, glancing repeatedly toward the door as if expecting visitors at any moment. Evelyn studied the roof, plotting a path to the skylight that would allow her to drop into the building undetected. The papers nestled against her skin seemed to burn with urgency. James had said Madame Colette might know how to contact the mysterious bishop, but the woman had already betrayed them once. There was no reason to believe she wouldn't do so again, especially now that the Germans were literally at her doorstep. Yet what choice did Evelyn have? Night was falling rapidly, the fading light painting the ruined town in deepening shades of gray and black. Soon movement across rooftops would become impossible, and somewhere out there, Bishop, whoever he was, represented the only hope for both James and the truth he'd sacrificed himself to protect. Decision made, Evelyn crept along the slanted roof, staying low to avoid silhouetting herself against the darkening sky. The tiles were slick with evening dew, treacherous under her worn shoes. One wrong step would send her plummeting to the alley below, or worse, into the hands of the Germans still searching the adjacent building. The skylight was half open, propped with a stick to allow air circulation in the stifling upper floor of Madame Colette's building. Evelyn paused beside it, listening intently. No sound from directly below. She peered through the dirty glass and saw an attic space, crowded with furniture and boxes, items salvaged from neighbors who had fled or died. With the careful movements of a child who had learned stealth as a survival skill, Evelyn eased the skylight open wider and slipped inside, landing softly on bare wooden boards. The attic smelled of dust and mothballs and something else, cigarettes recently smoked. Someone had been here not long ago. She froze, scanning the shadows for movement, ears straining for any sound that didn't belong. Nothing. Slowly she crept toward the stairs that would lead down to the main living quarters. Each step was a calculated risk, each floorboard a potential betrayal as she tested them with her minimal weight before committing. Voices drifted up from below, Madame Colette and someone else, a man whose German accent was thick even in the few French words he attempted. Evelyn dropped to her stomach, crawling the final distance to the top of the stairs. Through the railings, she could see into the apartment below. Madame Colette stood with her back to the stairs, facing a German officer whose uniform marked him as senior command. The woman's posture was deferential but not cowed, the stance of someone negotiating, not pleading. "They were here," she was saying in her accented English, evidently for the officer's benefit. The girl and an American soldier. He had papers, documents of some kind. "Very important," he said. The officer responded with clipped impatience. "And yet you did not immediately report this to the proper authorities." "I needed to understand what I had found," Madame Colette replied smoothly. "One does not approach Oberst Schneider with trifles. I had to be certain these papers were valuable enough to warrant your attention." The name sent a chill through Evelyn. Even children knew to fear Oberst Schneider, the officer who had ordered the public executions of resistance members and their families in the town square. The man who personally shot old Monsieur Pascal for his British radio. "And now," the Oberst continued, "the American is in custody, but without these papers, you claim exist." His tone carried clear accusation. "Perhaps there were never any papers at all." "They exist," Madame Colette insisted. The girl must have them now. She's clever, like her father was. Her father? The Oberst's interest sharpened visibly. The resistance informant? Henri Dubois? Evelyn's blood turned to ice in her veins. Madame Colette knew, had known all along about her father's activities, had perhaps even been involved in his eventual fate. The same, Madame Colette confirmed. The child has evaded capture for months. She knows the ruins better than your soldiers ever will, but she'll come to me. A note of certainty entered her voice. She has nowhere else to go. The Oberst seemed unconvinced. You seem very confident, madam. Why would she trust you after you've betrayed her companion? Madame Colette laughed, a brittle sound devoid of humor. Trust? In this war? The child is 12, Oberst, but she's not naive. She'll come to me because I represent her only chance of survival, and she knows it. And when she comes, I will deliver her and the papers to you, of course. Madame Colette's tone suggested this was obvious. For the agreed-upon price. The officer made a dismissive gesture. Half now, half when you produce results. That was our arrangement. He withdrew an envelope from his coat and placed it on a small table between them. Madame Colette made no move to take it, her eyes narrowing. The price has increased, Oberst. The Americans' capture has complicated matters. Now everyone will be looking for the girl. You overestimate your position, madame. The Oberst's voice dropped to something dangerous. The front approaches. By tomorrow, this town may be under American control. Your services to the Reich will not be forgotten by those who survive. The thinly veiled threat hung in the air. Madame Colette's shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly, but she reached for the envelope nonetheless. I want safe passage as well, she said, tucking the payment into her dress pocket. When the time comes. Naturally. The Oberst's smile never reached his eyes. Inform me immediately when the girl contacts you. No delays, no private negotiations this time. Of course, Oberst. The officer turned to leave, and Evelyn pressed herself flatter against the attic floor, heart hammering so loudly she was certain they must hear it. The front door opened and closed, boots echoing on the stairs outside the building, then fading into distance. Below, Madame Colette remained motionless for several long moments, staring at the closed door. Then, to Evelyn's shock, she spoke aloud to the empty room. You can come down now, child. I know you're there. Evelyn's breath caught. How? She hadn't made a sound, hadn't disturbed so much as a dust mote. Yet somehow, the skylight creaks when it's opened too wide. Madame Colette continued, still not turning around. I installed a bell on a string years ago, very useful for knowing when someone enters uninvited. Trapped. Evelyn's mind raced through possibilities, each more desperate than the last. She could retreat back to the roof, but darkness had fallen completely now. Movement across the treacherous tiles would be suicidal. She could hide in the attic, but for how long? Eventually, hunger or thirst would drive her out, or Madame Colette would simply inform the Germans, who would tear the building apart board by board to find her. I won't hurt you, Evelyn. Madame Colette finally turned, looking up at the staircase where she knew the girl was hiding. Despite what you just heard, despite what you think you know, I made your father a promise once, and I intend to keep it. The mention of her father again was like a hook in Evelyn's chest. Cautiously, she rose to a crouch, still ready to bolt if necessary. You betrayed James? She called down, her voice sounding younger and more frightened than she intended. You told them where to find us. I told them where to find him, Madame Colette corrected. Not you, never you. Come down, child. You heard what the Oberst said. By tomorrow, the Americans will be here. You only need to survive until then. Why should I trust you? Evelyn demanded, not moving from her position. Madame Colette sighed, suddenly looking older in the dim lamplight, the harsh angles of her face softened by shadows. Because I knew your mother before you were born. Because your father saved my son's life in '39, smuggling him to England before the Germans arrived. Her voice caught almost imperceptibly. Because some debts can never be repaid, but we try nonetheless. The revelation struck Evelyn like a physical blow. She had never heard of Madame Colette having a son. The woman had always been alone, aloof, feared by the neighborhood children even before the war. The papers. Madame Colette continued. The ones your American friend was carrying. They're more dangerous than you realize. Every German officer in the region is hunting for them now. Evelyn's hand moved instinctively to her coat, where the documents remained hidden. And you want them for yourself, she accused. To trade to the highest bidder? No. Madame Colette shook her head firmly. I want them delivered to someone who can use them properly. The same someone your American was trying to reach. Despite herself, Evelyn found her grip on the railing loosening. Bishop, she breathed. Madame Colette's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. He told you that name. He must have trusted you a great deal. She glanced toward the window, where darkness had fully settled over the town. Come down, Evelyn. We don't have much time. Evelyn descended the stairs with the cautious movements of a wild animal approaching a trap it cannot avoid. Each wooden step creaked beneath her feet, punctuating the terrible silence that hung between them. The papers pressed against her chest felt impossibly heavy, as if the truth they contained had physical weight. Madame Colette watched her approach without moving, her face a careful mask that revealed nothing of the calculation surely happening behind her eyes. Only when Evelyn reached the bottom step did the woman gesture toward a chair at the small kitchen table, one of the few intact pieces of furniture remaining in the decimated apartment. Sit, she said, not a request. You look ready to collapse. Evelyn remained standing, her back pressed against the wall. The nearest exit was 10 steps away, too far if Madame Colette decided to grab her. Outside, the rumble of artillery had grown more distant, but sporadic bursts of machine gun fire still punctuated the night. The battle was moving street by street through the town. I heard what you told him, Evelyn said, her voice steadier than she felt. You sold James to the Germans. You took their money. Her eyes flicked to the pocket where Madame Colette had tucked the envelope. Yes. The woman made no attempt to deny it. I did what was necessary to maintain my position, to stay valuable to them. She moved slowly to the stove where a kettle sat and lit the burner beneath it. The normalcy of the gesture in their abnormal world was jarring. The same position that allows me to help people like your American friend, like you. Help? Evelyn couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. Is that what you call betrayal? Madame Colette turned, something flickering in her eyes, perhaps anger, perhaps simply impatience. You think in black and white, child. That luxury died with the first bombs. She removed 2 chipped cups from a cabinet that hung crookedly from one hinge. Survival in this war requires becoming whatever is needed at any moment. German collaborator, resistance ally, grieving widow, seductive distraction. I have been them all. The kettle began to whistle, the sound shockingly domestic amidst the distant thunder of war. Madame Colette poured hot water over what appeared to be the last precious spoonful of real tea leaves. Your American friend is alive, by the way. She set 1 cup on the table. For now. The word struck Evelyn like a physical blow. James is alive. Hope surged traitorously in her chest. How do you know? Because Oberst Schneider hasn't killed him yet. Madame Colette sipped her tea with delicate precision, as if they were taking afternoon refreshment in peacetime. He wants those papers first, and he believes your friend knows where Bishop can be found. Do you? Evelyn asked directly. Know how to find Bishop? A ghost of a smile touched Madame Colette's lips. Perhaps. James said Bishop could get the papers to London, to people who would use them to expose the truth. The truth, Madame Colette repeated, the word sounding hollow in her mouth. Such a fragile thing in wartime. She set down her cup with a tiny clink against the saucer. What truth do you imagine these papers contain that's worth so many lives? Evelyn's hand pressed against her coat where the documents lay hidden. American officers ordering the execution of innocent civilians, a cover-up. And you believe exposing this will change anything? There was no mockery in Madame Colette's voice, only a genuine question. Wars are built on such atrocities, child. They are occurring at this very moment across Europe, ordered by men with medals on their chests and blood on their hands. German, American, British, the uniform changes, but the crimes remain the same. Then why does everyone want these papers so badly? Evelyn demanded. Because they name names. Madame Colette's expression hardened. Specific officers, specific orders, specific crimes that cannot be denied or obscured as the fog of war. And some of those officers have powerful friends who would rather see those papers burned, and anyone who has seen them buried. The weight of her words settled over the room. Outside, another explosion illuminated the night sky briefly, closer than the previous bombardments. The front line was shifting again. "The Americans will be here by dawn," Madame Colette observed, moving to the window to peer through a gap in the blackout curtains. "But the Germans will sweep the town once more before retreating, house by house. They know the papers are still here." Evelyn felt cold fear spreading through her chest. "And James? They'll take him when they withdraw, or kill him if he's no longer useful." Madame Colette turned back to face her. "Unless we act tonight." "We?" Evelyn couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. "I told you I made a promise to your father." Irritation flashed across the woman's face. "Do you think I've survived 3 years of occupation by being sentimental? By keeping useless promises? If I wanted those papers for myself, child, I would have taken them from you the moment you came down those stairs." The logic was undeniable, yet trust remained a luxury Evelyn couldn't afford. "Why did my father trust you? You never seemed to even speak to each other." Something changed in Madame Colette's expression, a softening almost imperceptible in the dim light. "We were more careful than that. Henri was one of the first resistance contacts in this region, even before the occupation was formalized. He established the network that eventually connected to London." She moved to a bookshelf and removed a false panel behind several dusty volumes, withdrawing a small box. "Your mother never knew. He wanted to protect her and you from the dangers of his work." Inside the box was a faded photograph, a man and woman standing together in front of a country house. Evelyn recognized her father instantly, looking younger and unburdened by war. The woman beside him was clearly Madame Colette, though barely recognizable, smiling, hair loose around her shoulders instead of severely pinned back. "We trained together in 38, she explained, a distant quality entering her voice. "When war became inevitable, we learned codes, dead drops, how to identify which German officers could be bribed and which would shoot you on sight for trying." She returned the photograph to its hiding place. "And we swore to protect each other's families if the worst happened." The revelation struck Evelyn speechless. This cold, calculating woman who had terrified neighborhood children and collaborated with Germans had been her father's ally all along, had perhaps even been his friend. "The network still exists," Madame Colette continued, her practical tone returning. "Damaged but functioning. Bishop is part of it, a courier who transports sensitive materials across the lines to the British." "And you can contact him?" Evelyn pressed, hope mingling with suspicion. "Not directly, but I know the signal that will bring him to us." Madame Colette glanced at the clock on the wall, its face cracked but hands still moving. "He passes through the area tonight, if he hasn't been caught or killed already." Before Evelyn could respond, the building shook violently, plaster dust raining from the ceiling as an explosion tore through a structure several doors down. The teacups rattled on the table, one tipping over and spilling its contents across the scarred wood. Madame Colette cursed under her breath, moving quickly to the window. "The Germans are destroying anything they can't take with them. We need to move now." "I don't understand," Evelyn said, her young voice suddenly betraying her age and exhaustion. "If you're with the resistance, why did you take German money? Why betray James?" "Because Oberst Schneider was already hunting your American," Madame Colette replied with brutal pragmatism. "He was wounded, fevered, leaving a trail any child could follow. His capture was inevitable." She began gathering items into a small bag: matches, a flashlight carefully covered with dark cloth, a loaf of bread. "By positioning myself as the informant, I gained Schneider's temporary trust. Bought us time." "Time for what?" "To save both your American and those papers." Madame Colette thrust the bag at Evelyn. "But only if you trust me now, completely, without question or hesitation." Another explosion rocked the building, closer this time. Through the window, Evelyn could see flames rising from several structures down the street. The Germans were implementing scorched earth tactics, destroying anything that might be useful to the advancing Americans. "Where is James being held?" she asked, decision crystallizing even as she spoke. "The old police station. They've converted the basement into cells." Madame Colette pulled on a dark coat, checking its pockets with practiced efficiency. "Schneider will have no more than 6 men with him now. The rest have been sent to the defensive line or ordered to withdraw." 6 armed soldiers against us? Evelyn couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. "And who exactly is us?" Madame Colette's smile was cold and sharp as a knife edge. "The resistance isn't quite as dead in this town as the Germans believe." She moved to the door, listening for movement outside before continuing. "We need to reach the church tower. The signal for Bishop must be visible from the ridge to the north. And after we signal him, then we get your American out while there's still time." Madame Colette checked the street through a crack in the door. "The papers go with Bishop to London. James comes with us through the tunnels to the American lines." It sounded impossible, suicidal even. Yet what choice did Evelyn have? James was alive, but wouldn't remain so for long. The precious papers that had already cost so much would be worthless if they didn't reach the right hands. And despite everything, something in Madame Colette's demeanor had changed. A mask dropped to reveal glimpses of the woman who had stood smiling beside her father in that faded photograph. "The tunnels beneath the church were collapsed in the last bombardment," Evelyn pointed out. "Not all of them." Madame Colette opened the door fully now, revealing a street eerily illuminated by the fires consuming nearby buildings. "There are passages even your father didn't know about, older, deeper." They slipped out into the night, keeping to the shadows as they moved between smoldering ruins. The air tasted of ash and cordite, thick with dust from pulverized stone. Evelyn followed close behind Madame Colette, her mind racing with questions she had no time to ask. As they rounded a corner, a German patrol appeared suddenly at the far end of the street. Madame Colette reacted instantly, pulling Evelyn into a bombed-out shop front and pressing them both against the remaining wall. Boots crunched on broken glass as the soldiers passed within feet of their hiding place, the guttural sounds of German orders carrying clearly through the night air. "They're moving toward the police station," Madame Colette whispered once the patrol had passed. "Schneider must be consolidating his remaining forces, or preparing to execute prisoners before withdrawal," Evelyn replied grimly. Madame Colette's expression tightened. "Then we have even less time than I thought." They continued toward the church, moving with greater urgency now. The massive stone structure loomed against the night sky, its bell tower silhouetted by flames consuming buildings to the east. As they approached the side entrance, Madame Colette produced a key from somewhere in her clothing, fitting it to a small door half hidden by rubble. "The sacristan gave me this before the Germans executed him," she explained as the lock turned with surprising ease. "Some doors should never be left unattended, even in war." The door opened to reveal a narrow staircase spiraling upward into darkness. "The bell tower," Madame Colette said, producing the carefully shrouded flashlight from her bag. "From there, we signal Bishop, and then—" She paused, looking directly into Evelyn's eyes. "Then we find out if your American friend was right to trust you with his life." The stone stairs wound upward in a tight spiral, each step worn concave by centuries of faithful footsteps. Madame Colette led the way, her shrouded flashlight casting just enough illumination to prevent a fatal misstep. Evelyn followed, her hand tracing the cold wall for balance, the rough-hewn stone scraping her fingertips raw. Neither spoke. The church amplified every sound, their breathing, the soft scuff of their shoes, the distant thunder of artillery, transforming ordinary noises into ghostly echoes that chased them up the stairwell. Each landing they passed featured a narrow window, offering glimpses of the town below being systematically dismantled by German demolition teams. Fires bloomed like malevolent flowers, consuming what bombs had left standing. "Almost there," Madame Colette whispered as they approached the bell tower. "Stay low when we reach the top. German snipers are still positioned in the hotel across the square." The final stretch of stairs opened into a circular chamber where massive bells hung silent, their bronze surfaces reflecting dull orange from the inferno below. The ropes that once rang them had been cut, a small act of resistance perhaps, denying the occupiers the ability to signal across the town. Madame Colette crouched beneath the western-facing window, motioning for Evelyn to join her. From this vantage point, the full devastation of their home was laid bare. Streets reduced to rubble, buildings gutted by fire and explosives, the orderly grid of the town transformed into a chaotic wasteland. Near the center, the police station stood relatively intact, its sturdy stone construction making it valuable to the retreating Germans. "James is down there," Evelyn whispered, her eyes fixed on the building where small figures in German uniforms moved with purpose, loading vehicles and burning what couldn't be transported. "Yes." Madame Colette removed something from an inner pocket, a small mirror and what looked like a watch with an unusually large face. "And we have exactly 7 minutes to signal Bishop before he passes beyond visual range of the tower." She positioned herself carefully at the window, using her body to shield the mirror from view from below. With practiced precision, she angled it to catch the moonlight, then covered and uncovered it in a deliberate pattern. 3 short flashes, 2 long, 3 short again. "Morse code?" Evelyn asked, recognizing the classic SOS pattern. "The beginning of it," Madame Colette confirmed, continuing a more complex series. "The rest identifies us as friendly and communicates urgency." Evelyn watched, transfixed, as Madame Colette repeated the sequence 3 times, then waited, her body utterly still as she stared into the darkness beyond the town's burning edge. After nearly a minute of tense silence, a faint light flickered on the northern ridge. 2 long flashes, a pause, then 3 short. "He's received it," Madame Colette breathed, a hint of relief coloring her voice. "And he's coming." "How long?" Evelyn asked, the weight of the papers against her chest a constant reminder of what was at stake. 20 minutes, perhaps 30. He'll approach from the riverside where the German line is thinnest." Madame Colette pocketed the mirror and checked her watch again. "We need to move now if we're going to reach the police station before Schneider executes his prisoners." They descended the tower with greater speed than their ascent, urgency overriding caution. At the bottom, instead of exiting through the door they'd entered, Madame Colette led Evelyn behind the altar to a section of flooring that appeared no different from the surrounding stones. "Help me," she instructed, fingers finding an invisible seam between 2 massive blocks. Together they pushed, muscles straining against centuries of craftsmanship until, with a sudden release, a section of floor slid aside to reveal another staircase descending into absolute darkness. "The catacombs," Madame Colette explained, shining her light into the void. "Built before the church itself. The resistance has been using them to move people and supplies without German knowledge." The air that rose from the opening was cold and ancient, carrying the musty scent of earth untouched by sunlight for generations. Evelyn hesitated at the threshold, an inexplicable dread washing over her. "There's no other way?" she asked, her voice smaller than she intended. Madame Colette's expression softened momentarily. "No safe one. The streets are crawling with Germans destroying everything in their path." She gestured toward the opening. "This leads directly beneath the police station. There's an access point in what used to be the wine cellar." Swallowing her fear, Evelyn followed Madame Colette into the darkness. The staircase descended steeply, the worn steps slick with moisture that gleamed in their meager light. The walls pressed close on either side, giving the unsettling impression that the earth itself was swallowing them whole. At the bottom, the passage opened into a low-ceilinged tunnel barely wide enough for them to walk single file. Roots from trees long dead hung from the ceiling like grasping fingers. Occasionally, their light would catch the empty eye sockets of a skull embedded in the wall, a grim reminder of the tunnel's original purpose. "People were buried here?" Evelyn whispered, unable to keep the horror from her voice. "The plague took half the town in 1648, Madame Colette replied, her tone matter-of-fact. "They ran out of room in the cemetery. Later, the tunnels were expanded for storage, then forgotten until the resistance rediscovered them in 39. They moved deeper into the labyrinth, turning at intersections marked with small symbols scratched into the stone, resistance signs invisible to anyone who didn't know to look for them. The tunnel gradually widened, the ceiling rising enough to allow them to walk upright. Wooden supports appeared, newer than the surrounding stonework, evidence of the resistance's efforts to maintain their secret pathways. "We're beneath the square now," Madame Colette said after what felt like an eternity of walking. "The police station is directly ahead. We need to be absolutely silent from this point forward." The tunnel began to angle upward, the ancient stone giving way to more modern brickwork. They paused at a junction where a crude ladder had been fastened to the wall, leading up to what appeared to be a trapdoor in the ceiling. "The wine cellar," Madame Colette whispered. "Schneider uses it to store ammunition now. There will be at least one guard." Evelyn's heart hammered in her chest, fear and anticipation creating a storm inside her that threatened to overwhelm all rational thought. They were so close to James, yet still impossibly far from safety. "What's the plan?" she asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. Instead of answering, Madame Colette reached into her coat and withdrew a pistol. Small, well-worn, deadly. "I create a distraction. You find James." "I can't leave you," Evelyn protested. "The papers, keep them with you," Madame Colette interrupted. "Trust no one but Bishop. You'll know him by this." She pressed something into Evelyn's palm, a small metal object shaped like a chess piece. "A bishop. Show him this, and he'll know you're sent by me." Before Evelyn could respond, the sound of boots on floorboards directly above them froze both in place. German voices, two of them, engaged in casual conversation. A match struck, followed by the acrid smell of cigarette smoke seeping through the cracks around the trapdoor. Madame Colette extinguished their light, plunging them into absolute darkness. She leaned close to Evelyn's ear, her breath warm against the child's cold skin. "When I go up, wait 30 seconds, then follow. Turn right at the top of the stairs beyond the cellar. The cells are at the end of the hall." Her voice was barely audible. "Whatever happens, whatever you hear, do not stop. Find James. Find Bishop. Get the papers to London." Evelyn clutched the metal chess piece so tightly its edges bit into her palm. "I'll come back for you," she promised, an echo of her words to James. In the darkness, she felt rather than saw Madame Colette's smile. "Your father would be proud of you, little one. Now remember, 30 seconds. With surprising agility for her age, Madame Colette ascended the ladder, positioning herself directly beneath the trapdoor. She raised her free hand to the wooden surface, took a deep breath, and pushed upward with explosive force. Light flooded the tunnel as the trapdoor crashed open. Shouts of surprise from the German guards were cut short by 2 sharp cracks from Madame Colette's pistol. Then she was gone, scrambling up into the cellar above, her voice suddenly loud and commanding as she yelled in perfect German, drawing attention, creating the promised distraction. More shouts, running footsteps, another gunshot, then another. Evelyn counted the seconds in her head, each one stretching impossibly as chaos erupted above her. At 25, a scream of pain that might have been Madame Colette nearly broke her resolve. At 29, the unmistakable sound of a body falling heavily to the floor. 30. Swallowing a sob, Evelyn climbed the ladder, emerging into a cellar illuminated by a single swinging bulb. The bodies of 2 German soldiers lay crumpled among crates of ammunition. Of Madame Colette, there was no sign, only a smear of blood leading toward the stairs. Following instructions, despite the terror threatening to paralyze her, Evelyn crept up the stairs, pressed herself against the wall, and peered around the corner. The hallway beyond was empty, doors flung open as guards had rushed toward the commotion. From somewhere deeper in the building, she could hear Madame Colette's voice, now speaking rapid-fire French, still drawing the Germans away from the cell block. Right turn. End of the hall. Cells. Evelyn moved like a shadow, her small size and the guards' distraction allowing her to slip past open doorways where chaos reigned. The cell block was secured by a heavy door, mercifully unguarded in the confusion. It groaned as she pushed it open just enough to slip through. Beyond lay a corridor lined with cells, most empty, their doors hanging open. At the very end, a single door remained closed, a padlock securing it. Through the small barred window, Evelyn could see a figure slumped against the far wall. "James!" she hissed, pressing herself against the bars. "James!" The figure stirred, raising a head matted with dried blood. James's face was nearly unrecognizable, swollen, bruised, one eye completely closed. But recognition flickered in his remaining good eye as he focused on her. "Evelyn." His voice was a broken whisper. "How?" "No time," She cut him off, frantically examining the padlock. It was old, substantial, impossible for her to break or pick. "I need the key." James gestured weakly toward the guard station at the entrance to the cell block. On the wall, hook with a red tag. Evelyn darted back, scanning the row of keys hanging on numbered hooks. The one with a faded red cloth tag was labeled 7 in smudged ink. She grabbed it and ran back to the cell, hands trembling so badly she could barely fit the key into the lock. The mechanism turned with a rusty groan that seemed loud enough to alert the entire building. The cell door swung open, and Evelyn rushed to James's side. "Can you walk?" she asked, assessing his injuries with growing alarm. Besides the obvious beating he'd endured, a fresh bloodstain spread across his side where his original wound had reopened. "Have to," he replied grimly, using the wall to push himself upright. His legs buckled immediately, and Evelyn barely managed to wedge her small frame under his arm, taking some of his weight. Together they staggered toward the door, each step a battle against James's failing strength and Evelyn's limited capacity to support him. The cell block exit loomed before them when a new sound cut through the distant chaos, boots running, heading in their direction. "They're coming back," Evelyn gasped, redoubling her efforts. "We need to reach the cellar." James stumbled, nearly dragging them both to the floor. "The papers," he rasped. "Do you still have them?" "Yes, and Bishop is coming," Madame Colette signaled him. A flicker of surprise crossed James's battered face. "Colette, you trust her?" "She knew my father, from the resistance." Evelyn pushed the cell block door open, peering into the hall beyond. Still clear, but the footsteps were growing louder. "She's the one creating this distraction." They half walked, half fell down the corridor toward the stairs leading to the cellar. Behind them, German shouts indicated their escape had been discovered. Ahead, the promise of the tunnel and the path to freedom beckoned. They had just reached the top of the cellar stairs when a single gunshot echoed through the building, closer than the previous chaos. A woman's cry of pain followed, Madame Colette, unmistakably. Then Oberst Schneider's voice, cold and precise, called out in heavily accented English. "The girl and the American, I know you can hear me. You have 30 seconds to surrender before I execute this traitor. Her life for yours." Evelyn froze, her eyes meeting James's in a moment of pure, helpless understanding. Behind them, German soldiers were closing in. Ahead, down in the cellar, lay their escape route, and Madame Colette's certain death if they took it. "Go," James whispered, pushing away from her support to stand on his own, swaying but determined. "The papers are what matter. Get to Bishop." "I can't leave you both," Evelyn protested, tears finally breaking through her hard-won composure. "You must." James pressed his hand against her coat, where the documents lay hidden. "This is bigger than any of us. Your father knew that. Madame Colette knows it too." 20 seconds, Schneider's voice rang out, followed by Madame Colette's pained gasp. James straightened his broken body with visible effort, a soldier's dignity reasserting itself even in defeat. "I'll buy you time. One last mission." His hand brushed her cheek briefly, a gesture of farewell. "Run, little mouse, and don't look back." Before she could protest, he turned and staggered toward Schneider's voice, calling out in a surprisingly strong tone. "I'm coming out. The girl is gone. Escaped through the roof." "I'm alone." Evelyn stood frozen at the top of the cellar stairs, torn between impossible choices as the sounds of James surrendering himself echoed down the corridor. The precious papers seemed to burn against her skin, the weight of their importance suddenly unbearable. 10 seconds, Schneider barked, disbelief evident in his tone. In that moment of paralysis, Madame Colette's voice reached her, not from the confrontation down the hall, but from a memory of just hours before. "Whatever happens, whatever you hear, do not stop. Find James. Find Bishop. Get the papers to London." She had found James. He had made his choice. Bishop was waiting. With tears streaming down her face, Evelyn turned and descended into the darkness of the cellar, the metal chess piece clutched in her hand like a talisman as she ran toward the tunnel entrance and away from the two people who had sacrificed everything to get her this far. Behind her, a single gunshot echoed through the building. In the darkest moments of history, It is often the smallest hands that carry the heaviest burdens. 12-year-old Evelyn's journey reminds us that courage isn't measured by strength or age, but by the willingness to stand for truth when the world conspires against it. What would you have done in her place? Would you have risked everything to protect documents that exposed uncomfortable truths, or chosen the safer path of silence? The choices we make when no one is watching define who we truly are. Evelyn's story isn't just about survival during wartime. It's about the moral decisions that shape our humanity when everything else has been stripped away. Sometimes the greatest acts of heroism leave no monuments, earn no medals, and remain forever hidden in the shadows of history, known only to those who lived them. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to support more compelling narratives that challenge us to examine our own moral courage. What untold stories of bravery exist in your own family history? What truths would you risk everything to protect? Remember, in a world that often feels divided, sharing stories that move us is one small way we reconnect with our shared humanity.